The howling winds carried Jessica Faulkner's screams through the canyon, but no one came. Not on the first day when the stagecoach was ambushed, not on the second when thirst began to torment her, and not on the third when her voice finally gave out completely. By the fourth day in 1876, trapped at the bottom of Rattlesnake Gorge in the Arizona Territory, Jessica had surrendered to the silence that had become her prison. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Jessica had left Philadelphia with dreams of teaching in the newly established school in Sweetwater, Arizona. At 22, she was ready for adventure, ready to make a difference in a place where education was as scarce as water. Her father had warned her about the dangers of the West, but Jessica had dismissed his concerns with the confidence of youth. The stagecoach attack had been swift and brutal. 3 passengers dead, the driver wounded but able to escape on horseback, promising to return with help. Jessica had been thrown from the coach as it careened off the road and down into the gorge. By some miracle, she'd survived with only a broken ankle and cuts and bruises, but the coach had landed in a position impossible for her to climb out. For days, she screamed until her throat was raw, until each attempt to call out brought nothing but pain and eventually, nothing at all. The silence that enveloped her was more terrifying than any sound she'd ever heard. Jessica had never felt so alone, so utterly abandoned. Nathaniel Nash wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his horse along the ridge of Rattlesnake Gorge. At 30, he'd spent most of his life under the scorching Arizona sun, working as a rancher, occasionally as a deputy when Sheriff Wilson needed extra hands, and sometimes as a guide for those who didn't know better than to wander the unforgiving terrain alone. Something caught his eye, a flash of sunlight on metal in the gorge below. Nathaniel reined in his horse and peered down, squinting against the glare. The remains of a stagecoach lay broken and twisted at the bottom of the gorge. He'd heard about the attack 3 days earlier, had even considered joining the search party, but his duties at the ranch had kept him occupied. "Hello down there," he called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. No answer came, but something told him to investigate. Nathaniel carefully picked his way down the treacherous slope, his horse carefully navigating the loose rock and steep incline. As he approached the wreckage, he saw no immediate signs of life, just the grim evidence of the attack luggage scattered and looted, the stagecoach itself splintered beyond repair. Then he saw her. A woman, half hidden in the shadow of the overturned coach, her dress torn and dirty, her face streaked with dust and dried blood. She was alive, he could see the rise and fall of her chest, but she made no sound, no movement to acknowledge his presence. Jessica heard the approach of hooves, saw the shadow of the man as he dismounted and approached her, but her parched lips could form no words. Her damaged throat could produce no sound. She tried to call out, to wave, to do anything to signal that she was alive, but her body refused to cooperate. Nathaniel knelt beside her, gently touching her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" Jessica's eyes flew open, wild with fear and relief. She tried to speak, her mouth forming words that produced no sound. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched at his sleeve, desperate to communicate. "Easy now," Nathaniel said, his voice calm and steady. "You're safe. I'm going to get you out of here." He offered her his canteen and Jessica drank greedily, the water painful against her raw throat. When she tried again to speak, only a harsh whisper emerged, then nothing at all. "Don't try to talk," Nathaniel advised. "Your voice. I reckon you've been calling for help for some time." Jessica nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm Nathaniel Nash," he said, beginning to check her for injuries. "Most folks call me Nate. I ranch about 10 miles from here." "Can you write your name?" He pulled a small notebook and pencil from his saddlebag. Jessica took the pencil with trembling fingers and wrote, "Jessica Faulkner, going to Sweetwater. Teacher, Sweetwater." Nathaniel's expression changed, a mixture of concern and something else Jessica couldn't quite identify. "That's where I'm headed. Had to deliver some cattle to a ranch nearby." Jessica wrote again. "How far?" "2 days' ride," he answered. "But we need to tend to your injuries first. Can you stand?" Jessica shook her head and pointed to her ankle, which was swollen and discolored. "Broken," Nathaniel confirmed after a gentle examination. "I'll need to splint it before we move." He worked efficiently, using pieces of wood from the wrecked stagecoach to fashion a crude splint, securing it with strips torn from his own bandana. His hands were calloused but gentle, and Jessica found herself studying his face as he worked the strong line of his jaw, the sun-weathered skin, the focused intensity in his blue eyes. "This might hurt," he warned as he tightened the last knot. Jessica bit her lip against the pain but made no sound. Nathaniel looked up at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You're tough, Miss Faulkner," he said. "That'll serve you well out here." He helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her so she could lean against his chest. As they began the slow journey away from the gorge, Jessica felt the steady beat of his heart against her back, the first reassuring rhythm in days of terror. They made camp as dusk fell, finding shelter in a small cave that offered protection from the elements and any potential threats. Nathaniel built a fire and prepared a simple meal of jerky and beans, softening some of the jerky in water to make it easier for Jessica to swallow. "The doc in Sweetwater will see to your throat," Nathaniel said as they ate. "Old Doc Wilson's patched me up more times than I can count. Good man. Drinks too much, but his hands are steady when it matters." Jessica used the notebook to ask about Sweetwater, about what awaited her there. "It's growing," Nathaniel replied, stoking the fire. "Not as fast as some places, but steady. Got a saloon, general store, blacksmith. Sheriff's office, though Wilson spends more time breaking up fights than catching real criminals." He paused. "And now they're getting a schoolhouse. Finished it just last month." Jessica wrote, "Children. About 20 last I counted. Some from town, some ride in from ranches nearby. They're wild as mustangs, most of them. Never had much schooling." Jessica smiled at this, her first genuine smile since the attack. She wrote, "Perfect." Nathaniel chuckled. "You might not think so once you meet them. The Hollister twins alone are enough to send most grown men running for the hills." As night deepened around them, Jessica found herself writing more, telling Nathaniel about Philadelphia, about her decision to come west, about her dreams for the school in Sweetwater. He listened attentively, asking questions, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Jessica fell asleep wrapped in Nathaniel's spare blanket, closer to the fire. She woke once in the night to find him still awake, keeping watch, his rifle across his knees, his profile sharp against the dying embers of the fire. In that moment, despite her injuries, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Jessica felt safe for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Jessica's ankle throbbed with each movement, and her silence was a constant reminder of her vulnerability. But Nathaniel was patient, helping her onto the horse, ensuring she was comfortable before mounting behind her. As they rode, Nathaniel pointed out landmarks, naming plants and animals, telling stories about the land and its history. Though Jessica couldn't respond verbally, she listened intently, occasionally writing questions in the notebook that was becoming their primary means of communication. "My ranch is just over that ridge," Nathaniel said, as the sun began to set on their first full day of travel. "We can rest there tonight, get you cleaned up proper, and continue to Sweetwater tomorrow." The Nash ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, corrals for horses and cattle, and a bunkhouse for the few hands Nathaniel employed. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Buck," Nathaniel said. "Don't worry, his bark is worse than his bite." Jessica scratched the dog behind the ears as Nathaniel helped her dismount. An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thought you'd be back yesterday," the man called out, then stopped short when he noticed Jessica. "Who's this?" "Frank, this is Miss Jessica Faulkner," Nathaniel replied. "Found her in Rattlesnake Gorge, stagecoach attack. She's headed to Sweetwater to teach at the new school." Frank approached, his weathered face creasing with concern when he noticed Jessica's splinted ankle and the way she leaned on Nathaniel for support. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Sorry about your troubles. You're welcome here." Jessica nodded her thanks, and Nathaniel explained her inability to speak. "Lost her voice calling for help," he said, a note of anger creeping into his tone. "Been trapped down there for days." Frank's expression darkened. "Damn bandits. Sheriff catch 'em yet?" "Don't know," Nathaniel replied. "We'll find out when we get to Sweetwater tomorrow. For now, Miss Faulkner needs rest and a hot meal." Inside the house, a woman who introduced herself as Maria, Frank's wife and the ranch's cook and housekeeper, took charge. She helped Jessica bathe, provided clean clothes, simple but serviceable, and prepared a hearty stew that was easy on Jessica's damaged throat. After dinner, Nathaniel showed Jessica to a small but comfortable bedroom. "It was my mother's sewing room," he explained. "Not much, but it's clean." Jessica wrote, "It's perfect. Thank you for everything." Nathaniel read her words, his expression softening. "Get some rest, Miss Faulkner. We've got an early start tomorrow." The next morning, Jessica woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices from the kitchen. She dressed in the clothes Maria had provided, a simple cotton dress that was slightly too large but a vast improvement over her torn and filthy traveling outfit. When she emerged from the bedroom, Nathaniel was at the table, discussing the day's ranch work with Frank. He stood when he saw her. "Morning, Miss Faulkner. How's the ankle?" Jessica gestured to indicate it was painful but manageable. Maria placed a bowl of porridge in front of her, sweetened with honey to soothe her throat. "We'll head out after breakfast," Nathaniel said. "Should reach Sweetwater by midday." The ride to Sweetwater was quiet, the landscape changing subtly as they traveled. Jessica noticed Nathaniel becoming more taciturn, his earlier storytelling replaced by a watchful silence. When she wrote to ask if something was wrong, he merely shook his head. "Just thinking," he said. "Been a while since I spent much time in town." Sweetwater emerged from the desert like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a dusty main street, with a few homes scattered on the outskirts. As they rode in, Jessica could see the saloon, the general store, a small church, and at the far end of town, a new building that could only be the schoolhouse. People stopped to stare as Nathaniel rode down the main street with Jessica in front of him. He nodded to some, but kept moving until they reached a building with a sign that read, "Dr. E. Wilson, Physician." The doctor was a man in his 50s, with spectacles perched on a bulbous nose and hands that, as Nathaniel had said, were remarkably steady despite the faint smell of whiskey on his breath. He examined Jessica's ankle and throat with professional efficiency. "The ankle's a clean break," he announced. "Keep it splinted for at least 4 weeks. As for the throat..." He peered at Jessica's open mouth, his breath warm on her face. "Inflammation from overuse. Voice should return in time, but you'll need to rest it completely. No talking for at least 2 weeks, and then only when necessary for another 2 after that." Jessica nodded, relief washing over her. Her voice would return. The silence wouldn't be permanent. "Where's she staying?" Dr. Wilson asked Nathaniel. "The school teacher's quarters, I reckon," Nathaniel replied. "That was the plan, wasn't it, Miss Faulkner?" Jessica nodded again, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. How would she teach without her voice? After leaving the doctor's office, they headed to the schoolhouse. The building was new, the smell of fresh-cut pine still lingering. Adjacent to it was a small cabin, the teacher's quarters Jessica had been promised in her correspondence with the town council. A heavy-set man with a mayor's sash was waiting for them, alerted to their arrival by the town's efficient gossip network. Mayor Thomas Blackwell greeted Jessica with exaggerated solicitude, expressing horror at her ordeal and assuring her that her position was secure. "The children can wait another month," he declared magnanimously. "Your health comes first, Miss Faulkner." Jessica wrote in her notebook, asking about her belongings, the supplies she'd brought for the school. "Lost in the attack, I'm afraid," Nathaniel answered before the mayor could respond. "Everything was looted or destroyed." Mayor Blackwell puffed up importantly. "We'll take up a collection for you, Miss Faulkner. The ladies' auxiliary will see that you have everything you need." Jessica expressed her thanks in writing, though she felt a growing unease at being the object of charity. She had come to Sweetwater to be independent, to build something, not to be a burden. As Mayor Blackwell continued to talk, outlining his grand vision for education in Sweetwater, Jessica noticed Nathaniel becoming increasingly restless. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his expression growing more closed. Finally, the mayor departed, leaving Jessica and Nathaniel alone in the small cabin. It was sparsely furnished: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, a chest for clothes. "It's not much," Nathaniel said, setting down the few belongings they'd salvaged from the stagecoach wreck. Jessica wrote, "It's mine. That's enough." Nathaniel read her words and nodded. "Independence matters to you." It wasn't a question, but Jessica nodded anyway. "Well," he said, suddenly awkward, "I should get going. Frank'll be needing help with the north pasture fence." Jessica caught his arm as he turned to leave. She wrote quickly, "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me here. I owe you my life." Nathaniel's expression softened. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Faulkner. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. Anyone might not have spotted her in the gorge. Anyone might not have been skilled enough to get her out safely. Anyone might not have treated her with the same respect and care that Nathaniel had shown. "I'll check on you in a few days," he promised. "Make sure you're settling in all right." After he left, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the cabin pressing in around her. For the first time since her rescue, she was truly alone again, and the sensation was both liberating and terrifying. The next day brought a parade of visitors, women from the town bearing food, clothing, and endless curious questions that Jessica answered laboriously in writing. By afternoon, she was exhausted, her ankle throbbing, her patience wearing thin. When the last visitor finally left, Jessica closed the door with a sense of profound relief. She spent the evening exploring her new home, familiarizing herself with its dimensions, its quirks. The schoolhouse next door beckoned, and despite her fatigue, Jessica couldn't resist investigating. Using a cane provided by Dr. Wilson, she made her way to the building and unlocked the door with the key Mayor Blackwell had given her. The classroom was larger than she'd expected, with rows of neat desks facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they stood mostly empty. A blackboard covered another wall, pristine and unused. Jessica ran her fingers over the chalk ledge, leaving trails in the dust. This was hers, her domain, her purpose. Even without her voice, even with her limited mobility, she felt a surge of determination. She would make this work. A week passed in a blur of adaptation. Jessica learned to navigate Sweetwater, to communicate her needs without speech, to establish a routine in her new home. The townsfolk, initially curious and sometimes intrusive, began to accept her silent presence. Children watched her from a distance, some waving shyly, others boldly introducing themselves and asking questions she answered in writing. True to his word, Nathaniel came to check on her, arriving on horseback one evening as the sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Jessica was sitting on the small porch of her cabin, a book open on her lap, when she heard the approach of hooves. She looked up to see Nathaniel dismounting, a package tucked under his arm. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing hair that had been recently trimmed. "Evening, Miss Faulkner," he said. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." Jessica shook her head and gestured for him to join her on the porch. She reached for her notebook, but Nathaniel spoke before she could write. "I brought you something," he said, holding out the package. "Figured it might be useful." Jessica unwrapped the brown paper to find a small slate and a box of chalk. She looked up at Nathaniel, a question in her eyes. "Thought it might be easier than writing everything down," he explained. "You can erase and use it again. Save paper." Jessica immediately put it to use, writing, "Thank you, it's perfect." "How's the ankle?" Nathaniel asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Better. Still hurts, but improving." "And you? How is the ranch?" "Ranch is fine. Frank's handling most of it these days. I've been—" He paused, seeming unsure how to continue. "Been what?" Jessica wrote. "Been thinking about making some changes," Nathaniel said finally. "Considering some new opportunities. Any specifics?" Jessica wrote, curious about the hesitation in his voice. Nathaniel shifted in his chair. "Sheriff Wilson offered me a deputy position again. I turned him down before, but I'm reconsidering." Jessica tilted her head, inviting him to explain further. "The cattle business isn't what it used to be," Nathaniel said, "and I've always had a knack for keeping the peace. Plus," he hesitated again, "it would mean being in town more." Jessica felt a flutter in her chest at his words, at the implication behind them. She wrote, "You'd be good at it." "You think so? Very good. You're observant, patient, kind when needed, firm when necessary." Nathaniel read her words, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "High praise from someone who's known me less than 2 weeks." Jessica smiled and wrote, "Some people reveal their character quickly in how they handle others in need." They talked, or rather, Nathaniel talked and Jessica wrote until darkness fell completely, the conversation flowing easily between them. Jessica learned about Nathaniel's childhood on the ranch, the loss of his parents to influenza 5 years earlier, his struggle to maintain their legacy. In turn, she told him about Philadelphia, her decision to become a teacher, her desire to make a difference in a place where education was valued but scarce. "It's getting late," Nathaniel said finally, standing reluctantly. "I should let you rest." Jessica nodded, though she was reluctant to see him go. As he put on his hat to leave, she caught his hand, writing quickly on the slate, "Come again soon." Nathaniel's smile was warm in the fading light. "Count on it, Miss Faulkner." He returned 3 days later and then again 2 days after that. Each visit lasted longer than the one before, their conversations deepening, ranging from philosophical discussions about education and justice to personal revelations about hopes and fears. Jessica found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that both excited and frightened her. 2 weeks after her arrival in Sweetwater, Jessica visited Dr. Wilson for a checkup. He examined her throat and pronounced the inflammation significantly reduced. "You can try speaking now," he advised. "Just a little at first. Whispers only for the first few days. Don't strain." Jessica nodded eagerly, then hesitated. Her first words after so long, what should they be? To whom should she speak them? The answer came to her as she left the doctor's office and saw Nathaniel approaching on horseback, earlier than his usual evening visit. He dismounted quickly when he saw her, concern evident in his expression. "Everything all right?" he asked. "I saw you heading to the docks and thought I'd check on you." Jessica stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. She cleared her throat gently, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of preparing to speak after weeks of silence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, rough from disuse. "For caring." Nathaniel's eyes widened, a smile spreading slowly across his face. "You're speaking." Jessica nodded, smiling back at him. "Just starting," she whispered. "How does it feel? Strange." "Good." She paused, gathering courage. "Better because you're the first to hear it." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a softening, a recognition. He reached out, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence, and took her hand in his. "I'm honored," he said softly. They stood there for a long moment, hands joined, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Finally, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "I have news," he said. "I accepted the deputy position. Start next week." "You'll be in town," Jessica whispered. "I will. I'm glad." As Jessica's voice returned, strengthening day by day, she began preparations to open the school. The town council had scheduled the first day of classes for the following Monday, giving Jessica 3 more days to prepare. With her ankle healing and her voice returning, she felt ready for the challenge. Nathaniel helped where he could, building shelves for the few books that had been donated, repairing desks, ensuring the stove would provide adequate heat as the autumn weather cooled. They worked side by side, their conversation flowing more freely now that Jessica could speak, albeit still in a voice that was softer and more measured than her natural tone. "Have you always wanted to be a teacher?" Nathaniel asked as he hammered the final nail into a bookshelf. Jessica, arranging primers on the newly completed shelf, considered the question. "Not always," she admitted. "When I was very young, I wanted to be an explorer, to discover new places, new peoples, to see the world beyond Philadelphia. And now I realize that exploration isn't just about geography. It's about minds, ideas." She turned to face him. "Teaching is a kind of exploration too, helping children discover worlds through books, through knowledge." Nathaniel set down his hammer, studying her with an intensity that made her blush. "You see things differently than most folks around here," he said. "It's refreshing." "Is that good or bad?" Jessica asked, suddenly uncertain. "Good," Nathaniel assured her. "Definitely good. This town needs some fresh thinking." He hesitated, then added, "I need some fresh thinking." The first day of school arrived with bright sunshine and a sense of anticipation that hummed through Sweetwater like electricity. Jessica stood at the doorway of the schoolhouse, welcoming each child by name, her voice still soft but clear enough to be heard. 22 students in all, ranging in age from 6 to 16, filed into the classroom, taking seats with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Jessica noticed Nathaniel watching from across the street, now wearing the deputy's badge on his vest. He tipped his hat to her and smiled encouragingly. Teaching without her full voice presented challenges, but Jessica adapted. She used the slate for longer explanations, had students read aloud when her voice tired, and developed a system of hand signals that soon became a special language between her and her pupils. By the end of the first week, she had established herself as firm but fair, earning the respect of even the infamous Hollister twins. Nathaniel's new position kept him busy, but he made time each day to walk Jessica home from the schoolhouse, their conversations becoming the highlight of her day. They talked about the town, about his work, about her students, and increasingly about personal hopes and dreams. One evening, as they reached her cabin, Jessica invited him in for coffee. It was the first time they would be alone together in her home, and both felt the significance of the moment. As Jessica prepared the coffee, Nathaniel wandered around the small space, looking at the few personal items she had acquired to replace those lost in the stagecoach. A colorful quilt from Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's wife, a set of china teacups from the ladies' auxiliary, books donated by various townsfolk. "You've made it home," he observed. Jessica handed him a cup of coffee. "I'm trying to," she said, her voice stronger now after weeks of healing. "It helps to have friends." "Is that what we are?" Nathaniel asked, his tone careful, measured. "Friends?" Jessica met his gaze steadily. "What do you think we are, Nathaniel?" He set down his coffee cup and stepped closer to her. "I think we're something more than friends, Jessica. At least I hope we are." Jessica felt her heart quicken. "I hope so too." Nathaniel took her hands in his. "From the moment I found you in that gorge, there was something. I can't explain it. You couldn't speak, but somehow I heard you anyway." "You heard my silence," Jessica whispered. "Yes," Nathaniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm still listening." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Jessica closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as they both surrendered to feelings that had been building for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jessica rested her forehead against Nathaniel's chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she admitted. "When I came west, I was looking for independence, for purpose, not for love," Nathaniel supplied when she hesitated. Jessica looked up at him, vulnerable but unafraid. "Yes, love." As autumn turned to winter, Jessica and Nathaniel's relationship deepened. They became a familiar sight in Sweetwater, the school teacher and the deputy walking together, sharing meals at the small cafe, attending church side by side. The town watched with approval as the romance blossomed, seeing in it a kind of poetic justice, the woman who had lost her voice finding love with the man who had heard her silence. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the school pageant, and a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with the holiday. Jessica knew that Nathaniel had been making plans, had seen him in deep conversation with the jeweler, had noticed his increased nervousness when they were together. The night of the school pageant, with the children performing the nativity story for an audience of proud parents and townsfolk, Jessica felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the successful performance. She had built something here, not just a school, but a community, a home, a life. After the pageant, as the families dispersed into the snowy night, Nathaniel asked Jessica to remain behind. In the empty schoolhouse, decorated with paper chains and pine boughs, he took her hands in his. "Jessica Faulkner," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "When I found you in that gorge, I had no idea I was also finding my future. You came west seeking independence, but you gave me something I didn't know I was missing: purpose, joy, love." He sank to one knee, producing a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, a small diamond catching the light from the lanterns. "I'm asking you to give up some of that independence," Nathaniel continued, "to share your life with me. To build something together that's stronger than what either of us could build alone. Will you marry me?" Jessica's voice, now fully recovered, was clear and strong as she answered. "Yes, Nathaniel Nash. Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the spring of 1877, when the desert bloomed briefly with wildflowers. The entire town of Sweetwater attended the ceremony, held in the small church with Reverend Lawson officiating. Jessica wore a dress of pale blue, a gift from the women of the town, and carried a bouquet of desert flowers. Nathaniel, resplendent in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers at the reception held in the schoolhouse, Jessica leaned close to Nathaniel and whispered, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" he asked, puzzled. "For hearing me," she said simply, "when no one else could." Nathaniel's smile was tender as he replied, "I'll always hear you, Jessica. Every word, every silence, for the rest of our lives." Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and fall to winter again. Jessica continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families moved to Sweetwater. Nathaniel excelled as deputy, eventually becoming sheriff when Wilson retired. They bought land on the edge of town and built a home that combined elements of both their dreams: large windows for light, bookshelves for Jessica's growing collection, a stable for Nathaniel's horses. In 1878, Jessica discovered she was expecting their first child. The news was met with joy not just from Nathaniel but from the entire town, which had come to see the couple as embodiments of Sweetwater's growth and prosperity. Their son, Thomas, was born in the winter of 1879, a robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Jessica took a brief respite from teaching, but by spring she was back in the classroom, baby Thomas often accompanying her, observing the world from a cradle beside her desk. In 1881, a daughter, Eleanor, joined the family, followed 2 years later by another son, William. Their home echoed with children's laughter, with stories read aloud, with music from the piano Nathaniel had surprised Jessica with on their 5th anniversary. Through the years, Jessica never forgot the silence that had once enveloped her, the despair of those days trapped in Rattlesnake Gorge. She spoke of it sometimes to her children as they grew, using it as a lesson about perseverance, about hope, about the unexpected ways that rescue can come. "Your father heard me when I couldn't speak," she would tell them. "He heard what was in my heart." The story became family lore, retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each telling, but never losing its essential truth. It shaped their understanding of love, of listening, of the power of silence to speak volumes. As Sweetwater grew from a small outpost to a thriving town, Jessica and Nathaniel grew with it, their lives intertwined with the community's development. Jessica eventually became the school principal, overseeing a staff of 3 teachers. Nathaniel served as sheriff for 20 years before retiring to focus on the horse breeding business they had established together. Their children grew, educated in their mother's school, learning justice and compassion from their father's example. Thomas became a lawyer, practicing in Sweetwater and the surrounding county. Eleanor followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher and eventually taking over as principal when Jessica retired. William, the adventurer of the family, became a geologist, mapping the territories that were rapidly being incorporated into the expanding nation. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Sweetwater celebrated its 25th anniversary as an incorporated town. As part of the celebration, the town council commissioned a new bell for the schoolhouse, inscribed with the names of all who had taught there. Jessica's name was first on the list, and when the bell was unveiled, Nathaniel stood beside her, his hair now gray, his face lined with age but his eyes still bright with the same admiration and love that had been there from the beginning. "They're honoring you," he said as the townspeople applauded. "They're honoring us all," Jessica corrected him. "Everyone who built this place." That night, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and pink, Jessica took Nathaniel's weathered hand in hers. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day you found me?" "Often," Nathaniel admitted. I think about what might have happened if I'd taken a different route that day, if I hadn't seen the reflection of the sun on the stagecoach, if I hadn't heard. My silence, Jessica finished for him. Yes, he said softly, your silence that spoke louder than words. Jessica squeezed his hand. I've never believed it was chance, that you were there that day. What then? Destiny, Jessica said simply. The universe conspiring to bring together two souls that were meant to find each other. Nathaniel smiled, the familiar smile that had been her comfort and joy for over 2 decades. I like that idea, he said, that we were always meant to be. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, hands joined, hearts beating in rhythm, their shared silence as eloquent as any words could be. The story that had begun in desperation in a desert gorge had become a testament to the power of being truly heard, truly seen, truly loved. And in Sweetwater, Arizona, where the desert blooms briefly but brilliantly after rain, that story would be remembered for generations to come, the tale of a woman whose voice was lost but whose heart was found, and the man who heard what could not be spoken. In their golden years, Jessica and Nathaniel watched as their grandchildren grew, as Sweetwater expanded with the arrival of the railroad, as the world changed around them in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. Through it all, their bond remained unbreakable, a testament to the love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. When Nathaniel passed away peacefully in 1920 at the age of 74, Jessica was beside him, holding his hand as she had done countless times throughout their life together. She lived for 5 more years, continuing to be a beloved figure in Sweetwater, known for her wisdom, her compassion, and the story that had become legend. Upon her death in 1925, the town erected a small monument in the center of Sweetwater, near the schoolhouse that had been her domain for so many years. The inscription reads simply, Jessica and Nathaniel Nash. Their story reminds us that true communication transcends words, and that love hears what cannot be spoken. The legend of the silent schoolteacher and the cowboy who heard her heart lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder of the power of love to transcend silence, to heal wounds, to build lives of meaning and purpose in even the harshest of landscapes. And in Sweetwater, where the desert wind still carries whispers of the past, their story is still told, a testament to the extraordinary journey that began with a woman who lost her voice from screaming for help, and the cowboy who heard her silence.